All right, Catherine.
Okay.
So much.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad that we could have a few minutes to chat about the upcoming changes to the immunization requirements, WACs, the WAC language. So the immunization requirements are in two areas. One is in the RCW, that's the law that the legislature passes. And then those laws give the State Board of Health the authority to write the administrative rules around the immunization requirements, including which immunizations are required, the documentation needed, all that fun stuff. And so it's those rules that the State Board of Health revised this past summer or I guess, yeah, it was summer. Seems so long ago. So they made some pretty major changes to what the requirements are going to be. Everything that I'm going to talk to you about today is going to be effective on August 1st of 2020. So these are rules that are going to impact next school year, not this school year. So that's important to keep in mind. I sent you some slides with some of the information about the rule changes. And if you can't show those slides, that's fine. I can still keep talking. But if you want to, you could then share those with, oh, you do have them. Awesome. Perfect. Okay. So I'll just have you advance the slides for me because I can't do that. So yeah, if you want to go to the next slide, can you make it go forward? There you go. You got it. Perfect. Okay. So go back one. You went, oh, there we go.
There we go.
Okay, there. So basically there's three main things that are changing, three big things. One is the immunization documentation. Another is conditional status. And then there's the ACIP update to the 2019 recommended schedule, which includes a change with Tdap that we're going to talk about. So first, let's talk about immunization documentation. So you can go forward there, Kathy. So immunization, so effective in the next school year, like I talked about. All vaccination records for students that are attending a new school or any new records that are coming in have to be medically verified records. So we're no longer going to be allowing for just parent-reported immunization records. Now, students that are attending a school this year don't have to resubmit their immunization records with medically verified next year. But as soon as they go to a new school, then they will have to submit medically verified records. Excuse me with my cough. So, and the new school means a new school even if it's within the district. So the way that the RCW, the law is written, is it's specific to school, not to district. So students that are moving up in a feeder pattern from elementary to middle school or whatever, they are going to need to resubmit their records with medically verified records. So what is a medically verified record? So it's obviously a CIS that's printed from the IIS because the IIS only contains medically verified records. It is a hard copy CIS that's completed by hand that either has a healthcare provider signature validating the record, or it can be validated by a school nurse, an administrator, or their designee, so school staff essentially, as long as the medical immunization records are attached to the CIS. And then schools that are using the school module, if they can verify within the IIS that a student has all of their required immunizations, or they get the medical records to update the IIS, then they don't need to have a CIS. They only would need to have a CIS if that student is starting in conditional status. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So the rules are different for school module users because they're using the IIS for their immunization work. Now we do have a new CIS that has just been posted. We've also updated the certificate of exemption form as well. So those are now on the School and Child Care Immunization website. So you can see those and start using those for registration, for like kindergarten registration going forward. There are 2 versions of the hard copy CIS on the website right now. And that's because the one that we've had up till now, we will continue to use for anybody enrolling in this school year. And then the new one is to be used for everybody who is going to be new to a school, newly enrolling for next year, and then ongoing for that. So it includes the new provider verification and takes away the parent verification. So let's see. Any questions about that, medically verified records? I just want to stop and give you a chance to think about that and ask questions.
Catherine,
Yes.
could you explain the rationale for the students who are moving between buildings within the same district, or why we would need to get new records for them?
It's because the way that the law is written about getting those records updated. So the law says a particular school that once documentation is submitted, then it's not required for that particular school. And the way the WAC is written, the administrative rules say that when a child is entering a school, a new school, on or after August 1st, that they have to submit new records. So it's following that, the way that the language is written. And part of this change was because we're out of the norm for what other states are doing. We are one of only 3 states that was allowing parent reported immunization dates. Definitely the standard is to have provider records and have accurate records. I think most parents they try to do their good due diligence and give us accurate dates, but we know that they're not always accurate. So we want to be sure that our students are really immunized the way that they're supposed to be immunized and protected against the horrible diseases that these vaccines present. Sorry, I got distracted for a sec there. So does that answer your question? Are there any other questions about what documentation is going to be required? Okay, then let's move on to the next slide. And I want to talk a little bit about conditional status and how that's changing. So the way the law is written, it says, on or before the first day of attendance, students must either have documentation of full immunization for the vaccines for the diseases that they are required to be immunized against, a completed certificate of exemption, or documentation of initiation of a schedule towards full immunization. So that's what the law says. Next slide, Kathy. So this changes. So the conditional status rules were changed to align with what the law says, because the law is like the bottom line, and then the rules are supposed to talk about how we administer the law. Okay, so the law is the standard here. So conditional status, starting next school year, means that what is initiation of a schedule towards full immunization, sorry. Like I said, they have to have their documentation on or before the first day of school. That they don't have 30 days to turn in a certificate of exemption or to turn in their missing doses because they can't find their records. They have to have their records before they start school. If their immunizations are not complete, then they have to get all of the doses that they are due to get at that time before they can start school. So they have to be up to date on their immunizations. If they need more doses, then they can start school in conditional status. And I'll talk a little bit here. This slide kind of talks about that, what that means. They have to have all of the vaccines they're eligible to receive on or before the first day of attendance. If they have more doses needed, they start in conditional status, and they stay in condition. They can stay in school until they reach the recommended date of the next dose in the series, as it is on the catch-up schedule with the national schedule. Then they have 30 days after they reach that minimum valid date to get the dose and turn in the documentation to the school. And then if they need more doses, say they haven't had any of their hepatitis B, so then they need to get 2 extra doses after they start school, then the conditional status continues until the next dose comes due, plus 30 days to get the dose and turn in documentation. And it continues like that until they're all caught up. If after that 30-day window, though, that they have to go get the shot and turn in their documentation, if that expires, then they are considered out of compliance and need to be excluded. So that's how the conditional status rules will be next school year. Now there are, if you want to go to the next slide, there are some special situations that impact conditional status. One of those is McKinney-Vento and foster students. They must be immediately enrolled even if they're lacking documentation. And we know that, that's not new. McKinney-Vento students cannot be excluded for being out of compliance with the immunization requirements. The homeless liaison in the district is supposed to help get their records or get them immunized, do what we need to do, but we can't exclude them for being out of compliance. That's not true with foster students. That's specific to McKinney-Vento. And then students of military, active duty military, those are covered by the military compact laws. And those laws say that the documentation, just like every other student, has to be turned on or before the first day of school. So they have to have their documentation in. But if they're missing doses of vaccine, they can have 30 days to go get those started. So their rules are a little different than the other students that have to have all the doses they're eligible to receive before they can start school. Military students have a little more time to get that first dose of a series or whatever dose it is before starting school. Next slide. So I have a few examples just to kind of talk it over with you. So I think the examples help it make more sense. So say a child is entering kindergarten and has had no vaccines at all. To start school, they must get each of the 5 vaccines that they would need for kindergarten, the Hep B, the DTAP, the IPV, MMR, and varicella. They have to get dose 1 of those. Then they start in conditional status. And then they wait for the next minimum valid date, which would be 28 days to MMR number 2. And then they have 30 days after that to get the shot and turn in documentation. And then they continue, like I said, in conditional status until all of the vaccines are completed. But let's say a child is entering kindergarten and they've had all their vaccines except MMR dose number 2, and they got dose 1 a week before the start of school. So they start in conditional status. They have to wait the 3 weeks till that dose number 2 comes due. Then they get the 30 days to get the shot, turn in documentation, and they're complete, right? Okay, next slide. So let's say a child is entering kindergarten and has had all their early childhood vaccines, but hasn't had those ones that they usually get after age 4 that they need for kindergarten, the DTP, IPV, MMR, and varicella. So they have to get those 4 vaccines and then they start school. They're not in conditional status because now they're actually complete. And then let's talk about students entering, actually the slide should say 7th grade, which I'll talk to you about, but a student is entering 7th grade, they're 11 years old, and they're missing their Tdap booster. They have to get their Tdap before they start 7th grade. And then they're complete, right? So they're not in conditional status. So any questions about conditional status? Okay. All right, so let's talk about the Tdap change. So like I said, the rules now point to the 2019 ACIP National Immunization Schedule. In the past, that schedule had said that if a child got a Tdap as part of a catch-up schedule or inadvertently, if whatever reason they got it at age 7 or older, then that could count for the recommended dose that's recommended to be given at 11 to 12 years of age. They said it should not be repeated when they turned 11. Then they kind of changed their mind a couple of years later and said, oh, it may be repeated. Doesn't have to be, but it might need to be repeated. 2019 schedule says it must be repeated. What they're trying to do is ensure that pertussis protection for that adolescent group. And so they want to make sure they have a dose right at that 11 to 12 year of age range. So that's a big change for us in Washington, because we have allowed students to meet the requirement if they got a Tdap as early as age 7, which is when Tdap is used instead of DTAP for students who need an additional dose. So the decision was made to, because of this and the large impact to our students in the state with this change, the decision was made to change the Tdap requirement from 6th grade entry to 7th grade entry. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that most of the states have that requirement at 7th grade. Students are definitely 11 years old when they enter 7th grade, but they're not always 11 when they enter 6th grade. Some students are 10 because they started kindergarten early. And then there's a lot of students, of course, that have summer birthdays. And so they are going to be like right up against that border. So providers had gotten kind of in the habit, some providers, of administering the Tdap dose early. So moving this to 7th grade decreases some of that pressure on providers to do early administration of doses. So starting next year, like I said, we're changing the Tdap to 7th grade, and 7th grade students will have to follow the new rules in that they will have to have a Tdap that's administered on or after age 10. So essentially the recommendation is to have that dose at 11, but the ACIP rules say that if they got it at 10 years of age, that it's acceptable. So as long as they got it at 10 years or older, it'll count. Our students in 8th through 12th grades, we're going to grandfather those in as being immunized under the old rules. They can still meet the requirement if they had a Tdap at 7 or older. We'll do a roll-up for the next few years until everybody is following the new rules. Any questions about the Tdap change? One thing you will notice when you look in the IIS, the Immunization Information System, it has the forecast of what doses are coming up that are due next. It is following the ACIP recommendations. So any student in there who had a dose at 7 through 9 years of age is going to be forecasted for another dose once they turn 11. So just so you're aware of that, our state requirements are diverging, like I said, a little bit from the ACIP recommendations for these grandfathered students. So you can see that. And then the last slide is just some resources about the rule change. We do have a website that you can access from the School and Child Care page. It's right up at the top that links there. And this website, this doh.wa.gov SCCI, that is the School and Child Care page that has everything we have around school and child care immunization requirements, all the resources, the forms. That's where you find the CIS. You're always going to find your most up-to-date stuff there. So that's one I would definitely encourage all of you to bookmark and refer to. So you always have the most up-to-date forms and everything. Like I said, we have updated the CIS and the COE. And we are working on some really broad communication about these changes to school administrators, school nurses like you guys, registrars, other school staff, parents, providers. I was just in a meeting right before this one when we were just going over some of those resources that the team is putting together. So we are really open to also to hearing about if you guys think of other resources that would be helpful for you in managing this change, because especially the documentation change, the medically verified records, and the conditional status. Those are big changes. And so we want to provide whatever tools that we can to help you guys navigating those changes. Any questions can go to this mailbox here, this OICP schools at doh.wa.gov. That I'm one of the people that monitors that mailbox, and but if I'm on vacation, other people are too. So that's a good way to ask questions or to give us suggestions or ideas, anything like that. We're open to. So just broadly out there, anybody have other questions or questions about this, or yeah, even other things?
Catherine, I guess I'm just verifying again what you said about the medically verified records. So you were talking about which kids were grandfathered into that, or not at all?
So students that are at a school right now, so if you're at, you know, ABC elementary school, right, and you've got students that are attending there this year, they don't have to turn in new records next year when they're attending the same school. But if they go to a different school next year, then they have to have medically verified records. And if they, and all your newly enrolling students for next school year will have to have medically verified records. So when you're doing your kindergarten registration, you're going to want to be using the new CIS form, not the old one, because they're going to have medically verified records to start school next year.
So for example, that would be, let's say I have tiny schools, so they're all in the same building, but technically they're different schools, right? So let's say our 8th graders going into, no, I'm sorry, 6th grade going into senior high school would need then a medically verified record. So I would have to go through all my 6th graders moving up to our high school or junior high school and make sure all of those are medically verified through IAS, whatever.
Yeah, so you could print a CIS from the IIS for those students. You could do that. If they don't have their records in there, aren't complete, then you could send a medically verified the new CIS home, and we have a letter that we're hoping to get these letters, the sample letters and stuff, up in January onto the website. But yeah, you could send that home with a letter that's saying, you know, you're moving to the junior high, and you could update the language, but it has some language about what medically verified records mean and which they need to do. So, and then yeah, for you, all of your kinders coming in too, you gotta use that too.
What about preschoolers?
Preschoolers, the same thing. If they're in preschool now, then they're fine, right? But if they're going to the same school, like they're moving from preschool to kindergarten and they're in the same school, then they wouldn't have to provide new records. But they're probably going to have to update their records because they're going to get those 4-year-old shots.
Right.
So those updated records need to be medically verified. So they need to turn in something from their doctor or something. We are really encouraging providers to make sure they're entering immunizations into the IIS, so we have complete records in there, but we know not all providers are doing that, and they're not mandated to by any law, so we're doing our best to encourage that, but sometimes there are gaps, I know.
So Catherine, I missed the first part.
Uh-huh.
The medically verified records, so is that getting records from IIS?
So medically verified, yes. So any
Okay.
CIS that's printed from the IIS, whether it's the validated one, which that one is also going to be updated. It's going to take a few more months because it's software changes. But the validated one, or the one that comes out of MyIR, which is actually the old version of the CIS, but that one still counts because those are all medically verified dates. So those count. And then if they use the hard copy CIS, it has to have either a healthcare provider's signature verifying the dates, or it has to have medical immunization records attached so that school staff can verify the dates.
So if we go into IIS and see new dates that we don't have on their current CIS, is that medically verified?
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Okay.
just print
Okay.
that Just print that new CIS and it'll be good. And again, the parent signature is being removed from
Oh,
the CIS, except for, and I didn't mention this, thanks for bringing that up because it made me think of something. So the new CIS, it has a section on it that the parent has to sign if their child is starting in conditional status. So that is a new requirement. That's the only time that the parent is required to sign the CIS is if they're in conditional status. They have to acknowledge the timeline that their child is on. The CIS does still contain the signature that allows the information to be updated in the IIS. And that's specifically for those schools that are using the school module. If they need to add the immunization dates to the IIS, they need parent permission because of FERPA rules. But I would encourage all of you to try and get that signature on those documents, because it'll make it easier if you do move to the school module down the road.
So if we call the clinic because it's not an IAS and the parent says they just got a shot, they don't have a paper, they really need to go back to the clinic to get something from the clinic, it sounds like, so that we have a paper that's medically verified.
Yes.
Yeah.
And providers are legally required when they administer a vaccine to provide the parent or the patient a record of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a legal requirement of the providers.
Mm-hmm. I know we have clinics that will say to the parent, oh, we don't need to give you a paper. The school can just look it up in child profile. So they don't generally send them with a paper back to the school. But it sounds like that's something we would need from now on for sure.
You would need that if you can't see it in the IIS.
Okay.
If you see it in the IIS, that's medically verified.
Then we're okay. Okay.
Then you're okay. Yep.
Okay.
But sometimes I know there's a delay of when they get the shot to when it's up there. It depends on how their electronic health record is interfacing with the IIS. And
exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
So Catherine, could you just speak briefly about the school module and the benefits of making that transition this year?
You betcha. I'd love to. Yes. So the school module, for you guys that don't know, it is a portal. It's a separate kind of part of the IIS that is specifically for schools to be able to use to do their immunization tracking. So the school module uses all the dates that are in the IIS. And what it does is you create a roster, and it's free. There's no charge to use the school module. You create a roster of all your students with the patients in the IIS. If a patient, like if you have a student that moves in from out of state and they're not in the IIS, school module user can add them so that you can add new patients. And you can update immunizations as long as you have medically verified records to do that with, which going forward should be less of a problem now that that's required. So you create this roster of students, and then there are parent letters that you can send out for like out of compliance or conditional letters. You can run reports to see who needs action, who's out of compliance, and is missing doses of whatever vaccine. So it's meant to be kind of a tool to do your immunization compliance work. When creating those rosters, sometimes if you have a really small school, it's easiest just to search for the patients in the IIS and add them. It's a pretty simple process to add them like that one at a time. But if you have a larger school, we can do an upload of your demographic data. So Ariel, who is our onboarding person for the school module, you would send an Excel spreadsheet with your demographic student data, the name, the address, the grade they're in, the different parameters. She's got the sample. And then she can upload that up into the back end and create your initial rosters for you. So that makes it pretty sweet and easy to get started. One of the big advantages certainly is that all those dates are in there. So you're not taking the information the parents give you on the CIS and then entering them into your student information system. The algorithms that are used in the school module, they're super robust, and they follow all the myriad of rules. Some student information systems just don't have that capability, so you get more accurate results. And also because we have all the data, in the back end tables, we can do your immunization annual report. We can pull that data out of the back. So using the school module, you don't have to submit a report. You just have to keep your roster up to date, which, once, like I said, we can help get that started for you. So those are some of the big advantages of using the school module. I think another really important advantage of that is actually for the students themselves. So instead of having their immunization dates in a student information system, it's actually in this state database that they can access anytime as an adult later on when they're wanting to go to nursing school and they need to know what their immunizations were. They need their stuff. It's really helpful to have one kind of holding place for people. We get a lot of calls from people who are going to school and they say, how do I find my records? So this definitely is a help for them as well.
I've got a question. Are the printouts from the state immunization registry from another state, is that considered medically verifiable, or do we need to backtrack on that?
Nope. If it's printed from any state registry, and every state has a registry, that's medically verified, because those same standards apply for all the registries across the country. Yeah, there's actually a national registry organization that sets those standards. So, and if parents, every registry does have a way for parents to get the information from those registries. So there's some kind of, usually a form or a process. So if they're coming from another state and they need to access that, you can just Google the registry for that state, and there's somewhere on that webpage there'll be a place where it explains how parents can get access to the records.
Is the school module connected to My IR, or is that different?
So My IR is kind of a different child in a way. It actually is separate from the IIS. And what it does is it takes the immunization records in the IIS and pulls it over to another database. I don't know why they built it that way. It's really strange to me, but that's the way it is. So it contains the IIS immunization dates, but it runs its own little software on the side. So the school module is actually part of the IIS. So it's a little different that way. If you guys are curious and want to know more about the school module website, which it's linked on the SCI page, the School and Child Care Immunization page, but it's just doh.wa.gov/school module is the shortened URL. It has a lot of documents on there, and it's kind of put together as an onboarding toolkit about the different steps that you would take to onboard onto the school module. The part of that is in the training. There's a training guide that kind of is the how to do things in the school module, which gives you some idea of its functionality if you wanted to look at that. There's also the training video, which it's 20-something minutes long. But if you watch that, you'll see what the functionality is, because it's training you how to use the different parts of the school module. So those might be helpful for if you're curious about what it would look like if you were using it.
Catherine, you had mentioned that when we have kids in the IIS, we can search their names and add them as a patient in the roster. Does that, and you said something about pulling them over. Does that also pull over their immunization so that we don't have to second enter them?
That's exactly right. Yes.
Okay, perfect.
So,
that was my concern, because I'm like, how much time is this going to take me if I have to re-enter all of these immunizations?
No, and that's the whole point, is that we want to use what's in the IIS and not have to do all this duplicate data entry,
Okay.
right?
I've been under the impression it was the opposite, so I was been hesitant.
Yeah, no, the only time you would need to add immunization records is if they're not already in the IIS. So if you got a student moving from out of state, or there may be on some of the older students, like your high schoolers might be missing some of their historical dates. If the provider hadn't entered those, pretty much every immunization that's administered for the last 10 years, like 95% of those doses are actually getting into the IIS, but it's those historical ones that sometimes are missing. Yep. Good questions. Any other questions?
Catherine, I have some questions about this year's immunization.
Okay.
And if you could give us some updates on the current status of reporting in the state, and you know, a little bit about the reports that we're getting about the school districts and where we're at with that.
Okay, sure, I would do that. So we've been really slammed with a lot of reports in the last 2 weeks, I'd say, which is good. We want those reports coming in, which is great. We're still working with some districts some reporters that were reporting on multiple schools. And there was a glitch early on in the SurveyMonkey where it wasn't saving more than one school for each reporter. That was fixed. So there's some we're going back to, and we're probably going to need to get that information in a different way from them. Excuse me, rather than having them like resubmit their reports again, which would be time consuming. So we're reaching out to those reporters individually. The spreadsheet on the school reporting website, which is also linked from the school and childcare page, there's a spreadsheet, and that was just updated yesterday. So it lists all of the schools that we have reports for, which is good. It does not list those schools that have reported that have errors in the report. So we do have a cohort of reports that didn't pass the quality check. So like the quality check is making sure that they're not reporting more students with different statuses than are actually enrolled in the school, for instance. That's like one of the quality checks to make sure the report is accurate. So when we get a report with some of these things that aren't right, we reach back to that reporter, and ask them to fix those problems that are on the report. So there are still some in that queue as well. So we're making progress. We are still accepting reports. I know this was a whole different way of reporting this year, and we really appreciate you guys working with us, but we need those reports. We need to reach a threshold of 95% of all the schools to give to CDC. So we need these reports. So please send them to us. If you haven't done it, please do it. If you have questions about the reporting, that OSCP schools email box is the place to send those questions to.
Catherine, I do have a question. After looking through, I looked at yesterday's list, and some of the districts that are there, I believe, are some of the ones that might have had errors, for example, in the SurveyMonkey, and so they're still showing up as out of compliance. So is it possible to update them or to highlight them in a different way so they don't appear as not having sent the data? Or
I see what you're saying. I will ask. That's a really good idea, so that you know who to reach out to, so you know that these are the ones that we have but we're fixing, but these are the ones that we haven't had at all, right? That we don't have at all. Okay, yes, I will bring that. I'm actually going to be talking to that team a little later today, so I will bring that suggestion up, and maybe we can do that.
Okay, that would be wonderful. The other question I had also was, I sent a link this morning to the Washington State Immunization data page and I was just curious, because it is the current, I believe it's the current year's reporting, and so is that up to date?
So the data dashboard page, that's last school year's data.
Okay.
So that won't be updated until this spring. So after we get all the reports in, Jeff, our data guru guy, he munges, that's a real word. I had to look it up. I didn't know it was a real word, but munges the data, which means he, moves it around and makes it make sense. And then that's when, after that is done, we send the report to the CDC, and then we update the website with this year's data.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have the current percentage then of kind of where we're at as a state in terms of compliance? Do we have an overall feel for how we're doing?
I think we had an out of compliance rate of about 8% statewide, but that was again last year's data. I have no idea for this year yet because it's still coming in. I have no idea, and again, that's an average. We have big swings in what that means. I mean, there are some schools that have an 80% out of compliance rate for their kindergartners, and there's some that are 100% compliant. So it really varies very greatly within that amount, but that's kind of that's a state average, and that's the number we really want to target. The exemption rate we really can't impact. Parents have a right to have exemptions. It's in the law that they're allowed to do that. And while we really would want to work with parents so that they don't choose an exemption, if they want an exemption, they have every right to have that for their child. But we can impact out of compliance rates. I mean, really, we shouldn't have, except for McKinney-Vento students, we really shouldn't have any students out of compliance in schools, because they should either be in compliance, in conditional status, or they should be, if they're out of compliance, they should be excluded. That's what the law says. So we really want to work on getting those out of compliance numbers down.
Catherine, one thing that I think I've noticed, at least with a student recently, is that they didn't come up out of compliance in Skyward for the 30 days. So in terms of printing a letter from Skyward or printing a report from Skyward, they didn't show up as out of compliant until they were 30 days after, I think, the shot was due. And maybe that makes sense, but it's hard to know that they're even out of compliance if they're not showing up on the report.
Yeah, no, I hear you. They should show up as conditional, because
they should.
Yeah, they should be conditional.
And I don't know if the student did. I don't think that they did, but
Yeah.
This time of year
Yeah, if you find those, do communicate that with your Skyward folks,
Okay.
because sometimes they do need to change the the algorithm, the way that it's done. But we do calculate the conditional status in the school module too, so that is in there as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? The new school immunization, I just put a request into our web people to get the new charts for next year up. So those will be up hopefully in the next few days. So when you get back from your breaks, you'll be able to have the next year's charts. Yeah, so that's good. And the next things I'll be working on updating is the IVERS, the Individual Vaccine Requirements Summary for next school year. And then also we'll be working on the immunization manual, because it needs to be updated with all of these changes that are coming as well. So be looking for more of those kind of resources too. Do you guys all know about the Individual Vaccine Requirements Summary document? Is anybody not familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with it, but then I'm just a newbie.
Well, newbie, let me tell you then. It's awesome. That's great. So we have the school requirements charts, and they tell you how many doses are due. And the back has some detail about like the intervals between doses, et cetera. But there's another document, and it's right in the requirements section of the school child care immunization page. It's called the Individual Vaccine Requirements Summary, and we nicknamed it the IVERS. It goes through each of the vaccines and talks about all of the rules and all of the exceptions to the rules and the catch-up schedule rules. And it has all of that detail really like down to the nuance. So that is it really is a great go-to document to keep and have to refer to. So when you're scratching your head going, why is the student out of compliance, or what's going on? Why does the student need another dose? That document will show you why and help you
And again, where is that?
So on the School and Child Care Immunization website, which is the www.doh.wa.gov, so just our normal, and then /SCCI for School Child Care Immunizations. And it's up toward the top of that page.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. It's also a great document. So like when I was a school nurse and I was sending students out to go get shots, and parents, I would print out their, like the summary page out of the IAS, because it has all their immunizations plus the forecast. But then I would also give them the page from the IVers, and I would highlight exactly what the rule is that says what they need. And that way I got a lot less students coming back to me having not gotten the shot they were supposed to get, you know. It really helps in educating providers too, so. Yeah.
Catherine, the other day, we received an email about the quality of monitoring that was done related to immunizations. And I believe that document went out to all the school districts.
Are you talking about the state audit?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Could you speak to that? Because I'm sure that it's kind of creating some questions.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I know that our office is planning some like official communication about it. I haven't seen what that is yet, but I can tell you that the state auditor, this Office of the State Auditor, they decided to audit immunization compliance. That started last year. And what they did is they kind of focused in on what were the barriers and what were the successful practices to having low out of compliance rates. They really focused on out of compliance rates. And they decided to, I think they looked at 8 school districts. They only looked at public schools. They chose, I think, 2 large districts, one with high, they did 4 districts, 4 that had high out of compliance rates and 4 that had low out of compliance rates. And they chose them from across the state, and they chose them a large district, 2 medium-sized districts, and 1 small district in each of those kind of groups. And they went in and interviewed the staff. They did record review. They did all that stuff. And then they came up with their report. And their key findings were that there were certain strategies that were very successful in the schools that had low out of compliance rates. And one of the things that was universal in all of the schools that had the high out of compliance rates is that the principals were not following the exclusion requirement law, that they were choosing not to exclude students who were out of compliance. So that did just go out broadly. I think it was released on the 18th, so just Wednesday. I saw a couple articles. There's one in the Seattle Times, Gadget News, I think. So I think it is starting to create a little buzz out there. It's worth reading. It's a really well-written report. And for people that immunizations isn't their work, that's not what they do, like auditor's office, right? I think they really got it. They did a good job and really honed in on what some of the issues are. So, yeah, it's a good report.
Well, we're getting questions about it from the local newspaper. And so they started looking around at some of the reported results, and they're not looking at the current one. But now they have lots of
right, they're looking at last year's stuff.
Correct.
That's yeah, because that's all that's been published so far. So that's the most recent stuff that they can look at. I can't wait to see what I do this every year. It's like, I want to know what the results are. And Jeff is like, I can't tell you yet. We don't know yet, you know? So I am super interested. There's a lot of people really interested about what's going to happen with MMR. Are we going to see a shift to religious exemptions? Are we going to see a shift to more students that are complete? You know, different things like that. So there's a lot of curiosity about what's going to happen there.
All right. Does anyone have any final questions before Catherine logs off today?
Not here.
Okay, well, Catherine, we thank you so much for this update, and we'll be sharing it with the other folks who were not able to attend today. And we know your email. We know how to get in touch with the department if we have any questions that come up.
Definitely reach out. So have any questions, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys.
Well, thanks.
You guys have a wonderful holiday break.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.